Hello and welcome to the Teknion webinar, The Design Story of Zones. Before we get started, I would like to share with you the setup for the webinar today. You have joined using your computer speaker by default. If you would like to join by phone, please click on the phone call tab on the support panel to the right of your screen and follow the instructions. Even though you are all in listen-only mode, we would love you to participate throughout the webinar. You can ask questions by typing into the question pane, and we will answer as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. I would like to now hand over to design journalist and author Helen Parton and Tom Lloyd and Luke Pearson from the award-winning design studio, Pearson Lloyd. Helen, Tom and Luke, over to you.
Thanks, Emma. Welcome everyone and good morning from London. It's my pleasure to be on this webinar this morning. I thought by way of introduction it might be useful to give a little bit of background to Pearson Lloyd for those not familiar with this design practice. So it was founded 20 years ago by Luke Pearson and Tom Lloyd, who we have on the call today. Their interests are as diverse as aviation, workplace, urban design, and I know from visiting their studio on the odd occasion that they're quite fond of cycling as well. So, but really at the heart of what they do is furniture design and what they're passionate about. So really, I wanted to explore the rationale and the concept behind zones. So let's begin. I wanted to, first of all, look at, there's always a great story at the start of every great design collaboration. So in your case, Tom and Luke, it was a breakfast in Milan with Teknion's president and CEO, David Fehlberg. That sounds like quite a momentous, sounds like there's a story behind that. So Tom, maybe if I come to you, can you talk us through what happened there and how that meeting went and what happened as a result of that?
Well, nice to see you, Helen, and it's great to be on the webinar today. I think Luke and I have been, as you say, in the industry for quite a long time, nearly 25 years actually. We started in '97, and relationships sort of build up in a very slow way. We like to get to know people before we start working with them, and there's always a sense of making little connections at different trade fairs or different events or different moments. And we'd been over probably 3 or 4 years previous to that breakfast, we'd been having little side conversations with different people at Teknion, and then with David, I think a couple of introductions during the Nearcon fairs previously. I think Luke had a chat with David at one moment on the stand, and it's those kind of little side conversations that slowly allow relationships to develop. But it was the moment when there was a conversation about meeting up, and it's very nice to go and have a really good breakfast in Milan. Often we're in the suburbs in little pensionis, or that's our history anyway, or Airbnbs. So we ended up in Via Manzoni, I think, at David's hotel. And I think Steve de Beek, who is the head of the design department at Teknion, was also there. And we had, I think, I seem to remember, very good eggs and coffee. And it was that moment when you sort of it's that moment when you connect and you start to look into people's eyes and you say, okay, is this the relationship we're gonna start? And indeed it was. But there was just I remember a very sunny morning, looking out across the streets of Milan, enjoying coffee and starting to talk in depth about how we might work together.
Wonderful stuff. Well, that sounds like a very promising start for what's ultimately been a very fruitful collaboration. You've talked about the co-authorship of this product. It doesn't sound like your atypical brief given to designer by a manufacturer. Luke, I'm going to come to you on this one. So can you talk us more about how that that collaboration piece, that co-authorship element of zones?
Well, I think as Tom's just touched on, it was very much about looking into the eyes and getting a sense of the relationship. We then went over, we were invited to go up to Toronto and to sort of meet the broader team. We had, I think, probably 2 or 3 days with David and the top people at Teknion. That was kind of really an important eye-opener, because there were probably about 5 or 6 people in the room, and that was it. And those have really been the same people that we've been working with for the last 6 years. And they said, well, we'd like you to kind of really tell us what you think about Teknion. And so we did, and we were incredibly direct with them and very frank. And we pointed out all the things that we thought was super powerful. And we also pointed out the things where we felt they had unlocked opportunity. And we didn't pull any punches. And Tom and I have always been very direct with our clients. We say what we really believe, and we tend to find that opens up a different level of conversation about what kinds of projects we could do. So we went away back to London, and we did the first stage was a sort of an analysis of what we felt the market was like, where we thought companies were going, the broader market. And then we started by really saying that we feel like we should generate a new brief. And actually they wanted us to do something very, very quickly. They wanted to sort of celebrate the beginning of a relationship with us. And we ended up doing a small collection for 2015, which was incredibly quick. And it was really a thought starter to raise some questions about what workplace was, rather than try and actually produce something that was going to be sold. And that was a really interesting moment that they embraced that and said, okay, let's do that, because they're a big company that produces stuff that gets sold, and they were prepared to actually produce an experimental collection, first of all, just to raise some questions.
Okay. And Tom, we talked this morning just about this collection being driven by a portfolio analysis, which I think we might come on to a little bit later, but this seems an opportune moment to perhaps just introduce that idea. Can you talk through that? That sounds like, part of the conversation that Luke's describing there.
Yes, well, we often reflect back to when we started, and if we were given a brief to design a chair, we were delighted when we would go away and design the chair. And now we're much more interested in understanding what is the correct product to design for a company. Because half of the problem is you can design a great chair, which is just the wrong chair for the market. And similarly, our relationships with Teknion, for example, are much richer in that sense. And they're about managing the overall sense of what the market expectations and needs are, and helping them reflect that back into a portfolio management. So we're now, after 5 or 6 years working together, we're continually in that process of trying to respond and reflect the needs of the market and where we see the market going through a portfolio kind of analysis. And that was the start of that, and that helped to create that sense of brief building for the collection.
Okay. And it sounds like those ideas and those initial discussions really dovetailed with Teknion's own core values. So creative collaborators, I guess that's yourselves, global and local ideas of design and manufacturing, insourcing, the human element, of course, the culture of design. So is that a fair assessment? It was a great kind of meeting of minds in terms of designer and manufacturer. Tom, I might again start with you, and then Luke, if you have something to add on that.
I think there's 2 or 3. All companies have their own sort of mix, their own set of DNA strands that help to make them unique. And I think for Teknion, one of the great parts is the fact that they still own all their factories and make the furniture themselves. And that has it means you're much more connected to the actual act of development than often when you're outsourcing. And I think, post-COVID, maybe outsourcing will be challenged even more through a sort of retrenchment of globalization. But having that at your fingertips and really talking to the people making the work is something very special. If you add that to the fact that it's a family-owned company, it's very direct. We're very directly connected to the owners and to the kind of spirit of the company. It makes it quite intimate. So even though it's global, there's a sort of intimacy to the relationship, which is very powerful. You mix in the craft of making it yourself, and it becomes quite a special set of ingredients.
Great. And Luke, can I bring you in here to add anything further on that dovetailing of core value, Pearson Lloyd core values and Teknion core values?
Yes, coming back to that sort of thing about that group of people in the room, when we were proposing, great to see that vertically integrated sort of system where they can go direct to the factory and get something made. There are lots of benefits on that. One of them is the control and the understanding of where the materials come from, and obviously the ecological impact. So really, 6 years ago, or more, we started talking to them, and we would be talking about processes and things, and they'd be saying, well, we want to build that up because that's a good process, and we're going to phase this out. We're in the process of phasing this line out because it's got this material in. We don't want to do that anymore. So they were already very joined up in terms of understanding the impact of production, which is something that Tom and I have been working towards continually, trying to refine designs, reduce the amount of material, engineer it down to the minimum whilst using the right material. And difficult conversations, that include packaging, shipping, the afterlife, breaking down the product. So if we had a technical question, they would just say, well, look, let's just get Jehan in here after lunch. And so somebody in charge of production would come in and we would present an idea to them, and they'd say, yeah, no, we can work with that. Or what about if you did this? Generally, in this sort of 2020 era, half the companies that are producing these, you don't know where they're getting it produced. They're really, in a way, a sort of collecting point. And that creates a huge complexity to the process of understanding what you're making and what the impact of it is. You've got to be very joined up to control that process. So that's been a really great thing. And it did affect a lot of the decision making and the componentry and the design that went into zones, and actually everything that we've done since. So I think for both of us, that immediacy of not only communication with people right at the top, we didn't, they didn't say, oh, we'll go and we'll present that to so and so in 3 weeks' time. It was like, well, what do we all think? Linked to how we're going to do it, and then after lunch, getting that answer. So I think this has allowed us to run very fast at the design process and get very fast responses. So we can cover a lot of ground with a relatively small amount of energy. So for us as a design studio, that's hugely beneficial.
Okay, and so zones evolved, or we saw the stirrings of zones in a concept called Towards New Workplace Paradigms, which emerged a year before zones launched officially. Can you talk us through those concepts, Luke?
Well, as I was touching on earlier, when we started having discussions with them, there was a NeoCon coming up, and they said, well, we'd love to have something at NeoCon 2015. And Tom and I felt, gosh, this opportunity is massive. We don't want to blow it by designing something too soon. So we proposed to them to do a small collection which really raised questions about the radical shifts in workplace design, which we've been seeing, and probably those shifts have been accelerating over the previous 5 years massively in terms of technological power and the freedom of movement, cultural shifts, recognition that you didn't have to be at your desk fully, recognition that people were working at home, beginning to work-life balance, reduction in workplace space that was actually given to individuals, and a sort of interconnectedness. We were also beginning to feel that there were other issues arising, such as the bench, which seemed to be literally a global sort of phenomena. And in our studio, we have benches, and sort of seeing people's shoulders hunch up when the phone rang because they knew that they were going to be interrupted by the, Joe Bloggs, who had a very loud voice and liked to laugh a lot, which, outside that bench scenario is a great thing. But when you're sitting next to somebody all day, it's difficult. So we thought we would thread together these observations and try and somehow speak about them with something that was rather abstract. So we had 3 elements in it. There was the coat stand, which we felt was a sort of almost a bygone symbol of a sense of arrival and departure. And in a way, you come in, where do you hang your hat? We were witnessing people were hanging coats and things on the back of their chairs. And this simple piece of furniture that was in your hall, and has been there for decades and centuries almost, and said, please take your coat off, take your hat off. So that was one element. That was about a sense of place. We then produced a love seat, which was really about talking about and I think we're all witnessing it now, the value of intimacy and true physical spatial interaction. You know, and it was about the comfort of space to generate privacy, intimacy, and focus between two people in a conversation. And then we had a rather playful piece, which was the sort of smallest office in the world, which was a sort of stool, table, and a sort of bag and coat stand, all connected in a sort of abstract form. So interestingly, the coat stand has gone on to be a product which is in Zones. The other two pieces actually did sort of promote thinking that we found in some of the other elements. And that was all produced in wood, because we wanted to talk about craft and the value of making and tactility, which also is a theme that we brought forwards into all our work for Teknion. And of course, wood, in terms of its effectiveness as a material that can be manufactured safely, ecologically. It can be, it has second life. We can make it into other materials, and it's also super hard wearing and you know, visually attractive, which is actually a very important thing for furniture.
Yeah. So you've talked about Zones reflecting new work models, and if we can see a short video to really illustrate that, and then I'll come back to perhaps starting with you, Tom, on how Zones reflects that new work paradigm. But yeah, if we can see a short video which will really give some visual clarity to what we've been talking about. Great, thank you for showing that video. So I think, yeah, we were going to come back to that idea of Zones being reflecting a new work paradigm. Tom, can you pick up on that following us viewing that video?
Yes, so I think, I mean, as we began to develop the brief for Zones, clearly there was already quite a strong trend of collaboration. Collaboration in the last decade has become a very powerful part of workplace planning. So that's my dog in the background. And that was a kind of anchor point of Zones. How do we establish a new collection to reflect collaboration? But at the same time, there was a very strong push towards the domestic look and feel coming into contract furniture. And we felt that we didn't want to push it too far in that direction. So we were really looking to try and find a strong mix between social spaces, but also allowing them to maintain a sense of productivity. And so we established this term of informal productivity. So as you can see from the video, there were no desks in that space, but we still see all those spaces as productivity spaces. So it wasn't only social lounge chairs and sofa settings. It was also about productivity. It was about the integration of technology. It was about whiteboards. It was about all the tools you need for workshop spaces. And I think we were looking for a slightly richer, more mature mix of what productivity looks like from as a sort of meeting point between very strong professional productive spaces and purely domestic kind of lounge type spaces that the market has seen building. And that meeting point was a strong sort of anchor of the collection.
Okay. So, Tom, you've talked there about this opportunity to explore the idea of informal productivity a little bit, that idea of social versus productive through the number of products which are in the range, which ranges from sofas, chairs, tables, as well as coat stands. Luke, you mentioned that in the original in the concept from a year before it was launched, through to screens and easels. So, Luke, do you have anything to add on that informal productivity piece that seems to be at the heart of what Zones does?
Yes, I think it comes back to our analysis that we did for Teknion in sort of 2014-15. They have an incredibly integrated portfolio, especially in North America. The product, literally everything can fit with everything. All the standards, all the sizes and everything is super organized in a way we haven't seen before. But what we decided to do was to actually kind of touch the boundaries of that. And while some of the pieces can literally be migrated into the workplace settings, some of the chairs and things, the traditional workplace settings, we wanted to produce a collection of pieces which would allow you to literally unfold into the open plan and build quite structured environments with quite predefined zones, effectively, and settings, to freeform scenarios where it could be utterly tailored by the organization's functional needs, emotional needs, which Tom just touched on, and also to take into account the sort of changing dynamic within any organization, depending on the project that they have. Sometimes one or two people come into a team with slightly different requirements for a particular project. What are the tools that they're going to need to do that? Now, the last sort of 15, 20 years of fixed workstations don't really allow for that adaptive nature. So we intended and worked very hard at building a series of components that were as mobile in the way in which you could lay them out as possible, and also intentionally light in terms of their construction, using the minimum amount of materials where we could, whilst providing the maximum amount of ergonomic efficiency, comfort, and sort of division of space as well. So there was a lot in it. And when we first presented it to Teknion, we thought that they would produce fractions of it, sort of bits of the collection. And after the first presentation, they sort of said, yeah, we love it. And we were thinking, okay, but which bit? And they said, we'll do all of it. So that was also a nice moment, because they realized that you couldn't really break it up. It worked as a collection, and that they should embrace that whole thing. So they were very brave and very committed.
Yeah, and what a fantastic endorsement of your work then, to have, we won't just have this piece or that piece, we'll take it all. Well, fantastic. Now, Luke, you mentioned earlier the tactility element of Zones, the wood in this instance. And one thing that it was immediately obvious when I saw Zones at Neocon was the fact that people didn't just want to look at it. People wanted to, get up close and see underneath a table or see what was going on with a chair and really, get to grips with it and touch it. So that was really key for the end user, it seems. So can you talk us through the materials used? Obviously, timber was key, and why they were important. And obviously that tactility piece was coming out quite strong in the end result. So I guess it must have been part of the process going through. Tom, I might get you to pick up on that.
So yes, actually, when we did the experimental collection the year before, we were, as Luke's mentioned, we were very interested in the craft side of it. And one of the things we started to look at was steam bent or laminated timber, which allows you to have structural timber elements that can go around corners effectively. And the coat stand and the love seat and also the sort of micro desk all use that technology. And we introduced the idea of beech back into the palette at that point, because we felt that oak and walnut and quite traditional contract species were a bit dominating, and we were thinking back to the rawness of Thonet and the early mass production of furniture in Europe, and we were sort of wanting to reintroduce timber as an engineering material. And when you laminate timber, you get very high strength to sort of cost to engineering parameters, and so that actually became one of the anchor points of the collection. And we wanted to enhance the sense of craft, especially to celebrate the making heritage of the brand. I think at the same time, we just felt instinctively that we didn't want the collection to be driven by upholstery and by textile. A lot of over the previous period, a lot of the market was driving sort of tall, high back sofa type settings into the market around the idea of collaboration. And we wanted something lighter, finer, and a bit more spirited in a craft sense. And that's how it allowed the sort of sense and the feeling and the brand of the collection to develop in a unique way. And I remember we were very pleased that we won the Best of Neocon award for the collection in 2016. And someone was saying it's just got a Scandinavian feel. And maybe even though I think Scandinavian, that idea is getting a bit tired in the market now, it still had there was a sense of purity and nature and rationalism about Scandinavian design that we were quite happy to be associated with through that collection. So, and there's a sense that it's definitely not domestic furniture, but it does share some of the values and heritage of furniture that you might want to cherish and keep hold of. And that's something we're interested in.
Definitely. I think that convergence of residential and commercial has really come to the fore in a lot of the workplace sector. So, that's interesting that you make that point. So we can't really ignore the fact we're living in a time of COVID-19, and the landscape of the workplace is changing. And I think on LinkedIn, I see daily, several articles going, this is the future of the office. This is what it will look like on the return to work. And one of the benefits of zones, I guess, is the ability to adapt in terms of proximity. Maybe in the time, in the old world order, that might have meant getting closer together to each other, but now means distancing safely. So how can zones help with that? Tom, I might come to you first on that.
Well, zones, even though its sort of heart is collaboration, actually the first anchor point of zones is being on your own, and the ability to work alone, whether it's on a lounge chair at a small solo space where you have a little bit of visual, a bit of acoustic privacy. So I think that's the first benefit of that, is that we're facilitating individual work removed from, as Luke's saying, this sort of high density bench, which is surely going to be challenged by the current sort of conditions. The other thing is about flexibility, because none of us know the solutions going forward. Everyone is trying to predict the next 3 to 6 months in terms of physical distancing, how quickly we can return ability in the way in which we plan spaces. And actually, you can pick up and move any part of the zones collection with 1 or 2 people with one Allen key in very short order. And so that's also given us a good advantage. I think the other thing that we've been reflecting on is the fact that standing is going to become a much more familiar part of the workplace, because actually you don't need to touch furniture so much. A standing meeting means you're not infecting a chair and a table at all, because you're just using the tools at your disposal. When we were developing zones, we came up with 3 kind of types of collaboration. One was the idea of consultation, where it's someone showing something. The other one was dialogue, when it's purely about conversation. And the third one was workshopping, where it's really an active, you're using tools, you're sharing whiteboards and technology to create ideas. Now, all those 3 types of work are going to continue, but actually zones, by dedicating particular spaces to those. We think that it will allow us, it fits quite well into a post-COVID world. Actually, the lack of upholstery is also a benefit because effectively it's very hygienic in the sense of its ability to be cleaned down sort of regularly, which unfortunately I think we're all going to have to come very used to.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to adapt quite a bit in terms of being able to, get back into our workplaces and use them as effectively as we can. So if we go back, say 20 years or more, the differences between what offices look like in Europe, North America, and Asia, and hopefully we've got people on this webinar from all corners of the globe. Those parts of the world their offices looked dramatically different, but Zones really represents that convergence of different continents in their attitude to the workplace. So Luca, if I can come to you here, why and how do you think that convergence of what an office looks like, whether you're in Singapore or whether you're in Paris or whether you're in Brisbane or what have you, why do you think that's come about?
I think we've got a convergence with many things in the world over the last 20 years. When we started our sort of office in '97, you've got to remember that I still remember opening up our first email account, and our website was just a few clunky pages, and if you wanted to, a lot of our clients didn't really even know what websites were for, so they had a few bad photographs of products and things. Prior to that, if you wanted to find out about something, it was magazines, which were generally, especially the trade magazines, generally local. So I think different cultures, different territories and countries had just organically grown their own work styles, sometimes to do with the type of people, sometimes to do with the climate, sometimes to do with the type of industry that they had locally, and it produced a different kind of format, which is, I think, partly why a lot of the very, very big American furniture companies were producing such systemized product, because it was the, Ford's Model T model, which was, we want to have one base module which we can replicate again and again and again. That's how we're going to get our efficiency. That's not actually about the end user. It's about factories making money. The alternative was, maybe in Europe particularly, hundreds of boutique small furniture companies producing slightly different product for very regional locations. So, and I think because Europe is broken up into lots of different countries, we see the French working slightly differently to the Germans and the Italians and the English and the Danish. We've all got different sort of architectural styles. We have different cultures and communication styles within the people in terms of proximity. The Spanish love to put their hand on your shoulder when they're talking to you, because it shows that they're focusing and they're warm. This affects workplace design, but prior to the internet and prior to ubiquitous aircraft travel, which probably will come back, there was much less interflow of ideas and also product. Over the last 20 years, we've seen, Americans come to the furniture fair in Milan, and the Europeans have gone to America, to Neocon, for example, and we go every year because it's so cheap, we can do it. And so as a result, you've got this migration of understanding and ideas. Also, we've had a huge speed up of international construction. In other words, as we were talking about earlier, companies not making their own product, but finding a sub-supplier who can make it cheaper. Well, those sub-suppliers are also making product for 5 other companies. So by definition, they're sharing information, and you're getting a sort of cross-pollination of not just ideas, technology, but also culture as people travel around the world. Half our studios from other countries. And, the idea of moving country when we graduated was quite difficult, because how are you going to move into that city? How do you find accommodation? Well, now I can find my accommodation remote, just like Airbnb, at the click of a switch. So I think, it's quite obvious in many ways that the convergence was made easier by technology. I think it's less easy to see whether the cultural convergence works, for everybody. I think maybe sometimes we're adopting things which aren't culturally quite right. I don't know whether cultures do change that quickly, but I think the benefits in terms of furniture are that we can cherry pick the very best ideas, and that allows progress to take place. So I think the outcome for the end user is far better than it was 20 years ago in terms of workplace design. I think we have smarter, more appropriate solutions out there that you can discover, find out how they're working, and then bring those into your own organization.
Okay. So I've got some other questions I'd like to ask. There's, any number of things I'd like to pose relating to zones, but perhaps if we can come on to some questions from our audience. So there seems to be a sustainability story behind zones. Is there something you can perhaps elaborate on? Maybe Tom, we'll start with you on that one.
Well, I think Luke touched on it earlier, which is that the principle of our practice is about minimizing material use. We have this term, the craft of industry, that we've been playing around with for some time, years actually, which is about how do you maximize the potential of your production, how do you minimize the impact of your production and your consumption, and how do you maximize the length of use of a product. And that's embedded in all our work, and I think Zones is a reflection of that. One of the principles of circular design is disassembly, and Zones very well reflects that. We're still challenging ourselves because some of the upholstery parts still demand polyurethane molding, for example. So we're certainly not perfect, but the principles around craft, in other words, just like Dieter Rams asks us to do, is create things that last a long time using the minimum amount of materials and being better at it. And we want Zones to fulfill some of those principles. And so by creating a tactile, crafted set of products, we expect or plan or hope that they will be cherished and they will last longer in the market. So some of those principles are decades old in terms of sustainability. Obviously, we're always challenging, and Teknion is also leading on taking out materials that are either toxic or harmful or difficult to repurpose and recycle. Water-based finishes, those kind of things are just embedded in the process of the design development.
Okay. Luke, you talked about the importance of wood in the collection. We've got a question about, is that a trend in furniture? Well, furniture for the office, I think more specifically. Is that something that's set to continue? Do you think you'll be using that more in products for the workplace? How do you see, wood in the workplace developing as a material?
Well, I think wood it's a beautiful material because I think it wears so well. It's also fantastically strong. It's very versatile, and you can shape it, you can make veneers out of it, you can pulp it, press it, you can paint it, you can stain it. So I think it's inherently versatile. But I think also we have to look very intelligently. Sometimes materials that you don't feel, they're getting a bad rap. For example, plastic. We're all looking at plastic in our oceans, but really the plastic in our oceans they're not furniture pieces, they're not chairs. Actually, plastic's a remarkably efficient material to make furniture out of because it's super hard wearing. The energy required to make a plastic chair is very low, and you can also turn it into another plastic chair should the style or the function become redundant. So I think wood will, for us, we really have always enjoyed working with wood, but we also want people to sort of have a think about all materials. We're getting close to a point where the amount of aluminium that's being mined in the world is being reduced significantly because people now understand that aluminium should not be thrown away, it should be recycled. And you can keep recycling. So whilst wood is something that we think is sort of inherently got some human connectivity, as Tom was saying, the craft of industry, what we've been trying to do over the last 20 years is really try and understand how we get the best out of every material to give it either an enhanced functional capacity or draw out its tactile and long life possibilities. You know, zones, we've got a chair, for example, which has an upholstered seat, wooden laminated legs, and then a plastic back. And so 3 sort of material combinations, but they've all been designed for a particular reason. And the chair just happens to be designed in such a way that you can unbolt everything. So the plastic can be recycled, the wood can be recycled, and the upholstered seat can be repaired. So we kind of try and build it into the process. It's not just for us, wood is a trend. It's, we're going to try and use it where we think it's absolutely appropriate, and then we'll use another material where we think it's appropriate. Of course, we're affected by trends. We all are. You know, and that's particularly the case in colour. You know, what we all, it's like avocado bathrooms. At some point, people thought they were lovely. You know?
Yeah, I'll come back. Yeah. Okay, thanks very much for that. I think we've got time for one more question. So maybe get some closing thoughts. You've talked a little bit about, you know, the change in the office landscape and how zones might help answer that. Do you have any further thoughts on how the office might change in the coming months and years, and maybe how you're going to respond to that? So yeah, maybe Tom, I'll get you to answer that first, and then Luke, we can hear your thoughts as well.
I think we're all trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
One of the things probably we've all immediately understood, it is possible to, home working is here to stay in some form or other. We've been persuaded, that's been facilitated by technology, and the event we're hosting right now is a reflection of that. Both the need to be at home, but also the power of technology to connect people all the way around the world into a single conversation. So that will immediately change the nature of organizations, because remote working will become more familiar. Maybe the footprint of buildings won't yet reduce, because the social distance will be balanced by us needing to have more space. So there's going to be a whole series of different impacts on that. There's even conversation around the fact that commuting will reduce, and transport, there'll be less strain on the transport network. So cities, the nature of cities will change. It may be some organizations we're talking to in London will only want an office 1 day a week, because they'll come together to collaborate and to workshop and to be social. But they will do most of their heads down work in their own personal spaces. So there'll be lots of, and that will drive new business models. So co-working spaces might no longer be about going there to focus. They'll be going there to collaborate. So there'll be new types of collaborative co-working environments, workshop environments where you can dive in to be creative and then play out somewhere else. I think there's lots and lots of ideas that are spinning around that we have to grab hold of and see where they go. I think the challenge is there's a short-term, a medium-term, and a long-term impact. And the problem with furniture design is it takes 2 or 3 years to develop, you know, furniture. How do you do that when you don't know what's happening in 2 or 3 years' time? So I think flexibility will be a very strong player in the future, about the ability to repurpose, reconfigure spaces, furniture solutions, all those ideas. We won't say there is one solution anymore. We'll just say you've got a kit of parts that you can use in a different way to reflect the needs of the moment.
Okay, and Luke, I know this is a huge question, but again, the same thing to you as some final closing thoughts there. Future of the workplace in the coming months and years, as far as we're concerned. I think.
Can't hear anything anybody's saying. So, you're back, Helen.
I think. In terms of questions, that's pretty much all we've got time for on this webinar. We've explored the concept of zones from start through to the development phase, relationship with the manufacturer, the sheer breadth of the collection as well, We've touched on its sustainability elements, and also how, you know, it can, in the times we live in, it's, you know, the perfect way in which to adapt how we work. So I think that's a really good point to perhaps conclude this webinar. So thank you very much, Tom and Luke, for being on that, and thank you all the audience members as well, and Teknion for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Helen.